Good evening, drillers. Wanted to talk to you tonight. This will be part one of two videos about the Electoral College. The Electoral College is a very complicated subject. You know, reading up on it, lots of books on the American presidency, and so a lot to talk about. I'll be talking part one here about the basics of the Electoral College, how do you become president, and then part two will be about criticisms and possible ways of improving our system of electing the president. Now, why does the Electoral College even exist? Why can't we just vote for the president the same way that we vote for House members or governors or senators or dog catchers? Why do we have to have this thing called the Electoral College? And there's really two reasons for it. One is we didn't want the legislature voting for the president. And the reason for that is it violated the Madisonian spirit of checks and balances. If this was a parliamentary system and the president was always elected from the majority party of the legislature, then the president would not be independent to enforce and to implement his own will. So you want the president to have independent powers, independent constituents, and most importantly, an independent way of being elected, hence the creation of the Electoral College. Now also, you don't want the people electing the president from a 18th and 19th century perspective. Why? Well, first of all of these men during the Constitutional Convention saw themselves as classical Republicans, small r Republicans. And not only that, the technology of the time would not allow you to count up all the votes of the people, of the vox populi in the 18th and 19th century, and it would be open to massive fraud. So what you do is each state gets a certain number of votes, they vote for who they want to be president, and they send it in to Washington, D.C., and they count up the votes. So how do you actually become president? Well, you have this body of people called the Electoral College, composed of 538 people. Now, how do we get to 538? Well, each state gets a certain number of electors. And how do you figure that out? Well, each state gets its number of House members or congressional districts plus 2 senators. So California has 55 electoral votes. Why? Because we have 53 House members and 2 senators. So, Alaska has 3 electoral votes. Why? Because they have 1 House member and 2 senators. And most states, except for Nebraska and Maine, have a winner-take-all system. So even if you barely win a state, if you win it by 900 votes, the way George W. Bush did in Florida in 2000, you still get all of the electoral votes from that state. So a common misconception is that the people on the first Tuesday of November are going out to elect the president. They're not. What you have is not a national election. What you have is 51, not 50-51, because D.C. is a state, thank you 23rd Amendment, for the purposes of electing the president. You have 51 state elections. So when you vote for Obama in California or Romney in Texas, you're not really voting for them, you're voting for their party. So that what happens is between Election Day and between January 6th, at some point, the state gets together all of its electors, maybe it's 55, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 37, and they get to write down the 2 names, 1 name for president, 1 name for vice president. They send it into Washington, D.C., and the vice president on January 6th actually counts the vote. So the Electoral College never really meets. You didn't want this kind of cabal where you had any kind of backroom deals and chicanery like that. And so this Electoral College never actually meets. But what happens is you do count up all the votes on January 6th. So understand, in November, you're not voting for the president. You're voting for which party gets to send its members, or which party's members get to actually vote for the president. So that's how you become president. If you don't get to Electoral College majority, like in 1800, 1824, 1876, the House of Representatives gets to choose the president, and they get to choose them on a state-by-state basis. So California gets 1 vote, Wyoming gets 1 vote. If you tie there, like they did in 1800, you just keep on voting over and over and over again. It took 36 rounds of voting in 1800 until you finally choose a president. If you don't have an Electoral College majority for vice president, the Senate decides. Next video, we'll talk about the problems of the Electoral College and possible ways of fixing it.